The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what secrets waited in the darkness between distant suns. When they finally built ships that could cross those vast distances, they found something they had not expected. They found that the universe was already full of life. The Galactic Concord was old. It had existed for more than 50,000 years. Hundreds of species had joined together under its laws and customs. They traded with each other. They shared knowledge. They settled disputes without war. And they watched the younger species carefully, waiting to see if they would become partners or problems. Humanity had joined the Concord only 10 years ago. In the scale of galactic history, this was nothing. A single breath, a blink of an eye. To the older species, humans were still infants stumbling through a world they did not understand. Daniel Carter stood at the window of his small cabin aboard the diplomatic vessel Horizon. He was 38 years old, with tired eyes and hands that had seen both war and peace. Before joining the diplomatic corps, he had served in the military. He had fought in the last great conflict on Mars, when the colonies had demanded independence. He had seen friends die. He had made choices that still haunted his sleep. But that was behind him now. He had put down his weapons and picked up something harder to carry. He had chosen to speak for humanity instead of fight for it. The Horizon was not a warship. It carried no heavy guns or missiles. It was built for talking, not shooting. Its hull was painted white, the color of peace in most galactic cultures. Its crew was small, 30 people who believed that words could accomplish what violence could not. Daniel watched the stars slide past the window. Somewhere ahead, a station waited for him, a neutral place where species met to solve their problems. And on that station, a problem waited that could change everything for humanity. The dispute was simple on the surface. A planet called 22b sat in a region of space that both humans and claimed. Human colonists had settled there 3 years ago. They had built farms and towns and started new lives, but they said the planet belonged to them. They said their mining companies had marked it for resource extraction decades before humans even left their home system. Both sides had evidence. Both sides had arguments, and neither side was willing to give ground. Normally, such disputes were handled by lower-level diplomats, but this case was different. They had sent their best negotiator, a being named who had never lost a diplomatic battle in 800 years of service. Daniel had read everything he could find about They were one of the oldest species in the Concord. Their civilization had existed when humans were still learning to make fire. They had silver skin that seemed to glow faintly in certain light. Their eyes were made of something like crystal, and those eyes could read emotions the way humans read words on a page. But what made them truly dangerous was not their age or their eyes. It was their culture. They believed that emotion was weakness. They trained themselves from birth to suppress feelings and act only through cold logic. They saw other species as lesser beings, creatures ruled by passions they could not control, and their diplomats used this belief as a weapon. Negotiators did not simply argue about facts and figures. They attacked. They found the emotional weaknesses of their opponents and exploited them. They used words like knives, cutting away at pride and confidence until their enemies made mistakes. When a species showed anger or fear or desperation, they knew they had won. Daniel had watched recordings of at work. He had seen her reduce a proud warrior from the Empire to a screaming rage with nothing but carefully chosen insults. He had watched her make an ambassador from the collective weep in front of hundreds of witnesses. Every time, she had won. Every time, her opponents had broken. His superiors back on Earth had been clear about what they expected. They told him that would try to provoke him. She would say terrible things about humanity. She would attack him personally. She would do everything in her power to make him react with the aggression the galaxy expected from humans. And if he gave her what she wanted, humanity would lose more than a planet. They would lose respect. They would prove that the oldest species were right about them, that humans were nothing but violent animals who could not control themselves. Daniel turned away from the window and sat down on his bed. His cabin was small and plain. A bed, a desk, a chair, no decorations, no comforts. He had learned to live without such things during his years in the service. On the desk sat a photograph. It showed an old woman with white hair and kind eyes, his grandmother. She had died 2 years ago, but he still carried her picture everywhere he went. He picked up the photograph and looked at it for a long moment. She had been a teacher. She had spent her whole life helping children learn to read and write and think. She had never raised her hand in anger against anyone. When Daniel was young and quick to fight, she had told him something he never forgot. She said that anyone could throw a punch. That was easy. The hard thing was to keep your hand open when everything inside you wanted to make a fist. He had not understood her then. He had been too young, too angry at the world, but he understood her now. The door chimed softly. A voice came through the speaker. It was his aide, a young woman named Bate Holland, telling him that they would reach the station in 2 hours. Daniel put the photograph back on the desk and stood up. He walked to the small mirror on the wall and looked at himself. He saw the gray starting to show in his hair. He saw the lines around his eyes. He saw a man who had made many mistakes and was trying to do better. The galaxy thought it knew what humans were. They had read the histories. They had seen the wars. They knew about the bombs that had nearly destroyed Earth. They knew about the colonies that had fought each other across the solar system. To them, humans were dangerous, unpredictable, violent. And Daniel could not really argue with that. Humanity had done terrible things. They had hurt each other in ways that explanation. Even now, with the stars open before them, they still struggled with the darkness inside themselves. But they were also capable of something else, something the older species did not understand. Humans could change. They could look at their mistakes and choose to be different. They could break the cycles of violence that had defined them for so long. Daniel did not know if he could beat. He did not know if he could protect the colonists on 22B, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not become the monster the galaxy expected him to be. He would not give them another reason to fear humanity. Whatever happened in that negotiation chamber, he would keep his grandmother's words in his heart. He would keep his hand open, even when everything inside him screamed to make a fist. The horizon flew on through the darkness, carrying its small crew toward an uncertain future, and Daniel Carter prepared himself for the hardest battle of his life, a battle he would have to fight without raising a single weapon. The station hung in space like a jewel made of light and metal. It was called the meeting place, and it had existed for longer than any species could remember. Thousands of negotiations had taken place within its walls. Wars had been prevented here. Peace had been made. And sometimes, the fate of entire worlds had been decided by words spoken in its many chambers. Daniel stepped off the horizon and walked through the docking tube. The air inside the station smelled strange. A mix of different atmospheres blended together to suit as many species as possible. The halls were wide and tall, built to accommodate beings of all sizes. He passed creatures he had never seen before. Some walked on 2 legs like him. Others crawled or floated or moved in ways he could not understand. Bate walked beside him, carrying a small case with their documents and records. She was nervous. Daniel could see it in the way she gripped the case too tightly, in the way her eyes moved constantly from one alien face to another. He did not blame her. This was her first major assignment. She had trained for years, learned a dozen alien languages, studied the customs of 100 different species, but nothing could truly prepare a person for the reality of standing among beings from across the galaxy. They followed their guide, a small floating sphere that spoke in a pleasant voice, through corridors and lifts until they reached a large door. The sphere announced that the negotiation chamber was beyond, and that they could enter when ready. Daniel paused and looked at Bait. He told her that whatever happened inside, she should remember that they were not here to win. They were here to find a solution that worked for everyone. Bait nodded, but he could see the doubt in her eyes. She had read the same reports he had. She knew what could do. The door opened, and they walked inside. The chamber was enormous. The ceiling rose so high that it disappeared into shadow. The walls were made of some dark stone that absorbed light. In the center of the room sat a long table made of something that looked like frozen water. Chairs lined both sides, shaped differently to accommodate different bodies. At the far end of the table, they waited. Stood like a statue carved from silver. Her skin caught the dim light and reflected it back in soft patterns. Her eyes were the color of deep ice, and they fixed on Daniel the moment he entered the room. She was not alone. 4 advisors stood behind her, each one dressed in flowing robes of dark blue. Their faces showed nothing. No curiosity, no hostility, no welcome. They simply watched. Daniel walked to his place at the table and sat down. Bait took the seat beside him. Across the table, remained standing for a long moment before slowly lowering herself into her chair. No one spoke. The silence stretched out like a living thing, filling every corner of the vast room. Finally, Daniel spoke. He said that he was honored to meet Ambassador. He said that he hoped they could find a solution that would satisfy both their peoples. Did not respond to his greeting. She simply looked at him with those crystal eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold and flat. She said that she had studied humans. She said she found them interesting in the way one might find a disease interesting. Something to be examined and understood so it could be controlled. Daniel felt the words hit him like stones, but he kept his face calm. He had expected this. He had prepared for it. He said that he understood the position regarding 22B. He said that the human colonists had not known about the prior claim when they settled there. He suggested that perhaps they could share the planet. Laughed. It was not a warm sound. She said that sharing was something children did when they had not yet learned that the universe rewarded strength. She said that humans had been in space for barely a moment, and already they wanted to divide territories with species that had sailed between stars when humans were still living in caves. Daniel kept his voice steady. He pointed out that the colonists had built homes and farms. Families lived there now. Children had been born on that world. Surely there was a way forward that did not require destroying what they had built. Leaned forward. Her eyes seemed to glow brighter. She said that she knew about human families. She knew about human children. She knew about all the human children who had died in human wars. She asked how many millions of young ones humanity had slaughtered in their endless conflicts. She asked what right such a species had to speak of protecting children. Bait made a small sound beside him. Daniel felt his hands wanting to curl into fists beneath the table. The anger rose in his chest like fire. But he breathed. He reminded himself why he was here. He reminded himself of his grandmother's words. He admitted that she was right. He said that humanity had a dark history. He said that they had done terrible things to each other. He did not try to defend or excuse any of it. Seemed surprised for a moment, then she pressed harder. She talked about Earth's world wars. She talked about the nuclear weapons that had nearly ended everything. She talked about the fighting on Mars and the lunar colonies. She recited dates and numbers and death counts with perfect accuracy. She spoke of humanity as if they were animals that had somehow learned to build ships. Daniel listened to all of it. Every word cut into him, but he did not react. He did not argue. He did not shout. When she finished, he spoke quietly. He said that everything she said was true. He said that humans had made terrible mistakes. He said that they carried the weight of those mistakes every day. But he also said that they were trying to change. They were trying to be better than their past. Stood up, she walked around the table until she was standing right beside him. Her presence was overwhelming. The cold that came off her skin made the air feel like winter. She said that she had broken stronger beings than him. She said that she had made warriors with 1,000 victories weep like infants. She said that he was nothing. His species was nothing. They were a brief mistake that the galaxy would soon correct. She asked him what he had to say to that. Daniel looked up at her. He saw the expectation in her eyes. She was waiting for him to snap. She was waiting for him to show the violence that all humans carried inside them. She was waiting for him to prove everything she believed. He stood up slowly. He pushed his chair back from the table. He said that she was very good at what she did. He said that her words were sharp and her aim was true. He told her that she had found every weakness and exploited it perfectly. Then he said something that made her freeze. He said that he was not going to fight her. He was not going to give her what she wanted. He was not going to become the monster she needed him to be. He turned and walked toward the door. Behind him, the chamber fell completely silent. No one moved. No one spoke. At the door, Daniel stopped. He did not turn around. He said that when she was ready to speak to him as an equal, he would be waiting. He said that he would be on his ship. He said that he hoped she would come. Then he opened the door and walked out, leaving standing in stunned silence. Bait hurried after him, her face pale with shock. In the corridor, she grabbed his arm and asked what he had done. She said that walking away was surrender. She said that they had lost everything. Daniel shook his head. He said that he had not surrendered anything. He said that he had simply refused to play her game. He did not know if it would work. He did not know what would happen next. But he knew that he had kept his promise to himself. He had kept his hand open. Stood alone in the negotiation chamber for a very long time after the human left. Her advisors had tried to speak to her, but she had dismissed them with a single gesture. They had filed out quietly, confused and uncertain. In all their years of service, they had never seen her fail. They had never seen anyone walk away from her. The chamber was silent now. The only sound was the soft hum of the station systems, a constant whisper that most beings learned to ignore. Did not ignore it. She focused on it, using it to anchor her thoughts as she tried to understand what had just happened. She had used every technique. She had attacked his species, his history, his very right to exist among the stars. She had spoken truths that should have broken him. The facts she had recited were not lies. Humanity really had killed millions of their own kind. They really had nearly destroyed their world with weapons of terrible power. Everything she said could be in any historical database. And he had agreed with her. That was the part she could not understand. When she attacked, beings fought back. That was the natural order. Every species she had ever faced had risen to defend themselves, to argue, to shout, to threaten. Their anger became a weapon she could use against them. Their fear became chains she could bind them with. But Daniel Carter had done neither. He had admitted that she was right. He had accepted the weight of his species' crimes without trying to excuse them, and then he had simply walked away. Moved to the window that looked out over the station's central hub. Ships came and went below, tiny points of light against the darkness. She watched them without really seeing them. In 800 years, she had negotiated with warriors who had conquered entire systems. She had faced beings that could kill with a thought. She had dealt with species so alien that their very presence caused physical pain, and she had broken all of them. But this human had refused to break. She thought about the look in his eyes when he had stood up. She had expected to see anger or fear or desperation. Those were the emotions she fed on, the weaknesses she exploited. Instead, she had seen something else, something that looked almost like sadness. Not sadness for himself, sadness for her. The thought made her uncomfortable in ways she could not easily name. Far across the station, Daniel sat in his cabin aboard the Horizon. Bate had argued with him for an hour after they returned. She said that he had made a terrible mistake. She said that they would claim victory. She said that humanity would lose the planet and their reputation. Daniel had listened to her concerns and told her that he understood. He had not tried to convince her that he was right. He simply said that he had done what he believed was necessary and that they would have to wait to see what happened. Now he was alone. The photograph of his grandmother sat on the desk before him. He looked at her kind face and wondered what she would think of what he had done. He did not feel like a winner. He did not feel like he had accomplished anything great. He felt tired and uncertain and a little bit afraid. The anger that had tried to provoke was still there, deep inside him. He had not destroyed it. He had simply chosen not to let it control him. That was harder than anyone who had not faced such a test could understand. News of the confrontation spread quickly. The meeting place had thousands of observers from dozens of species. Within hours, reports were flying across the galaxy. A human diplomat had walked out on. They were calling it a surrender. Other species were calling it something else. No one could agree on what it meant. On a ship bound for the core worlds, a warrior named heard the story and laughed. He had faced years ago and had lost badly. He remembered the shame of screaming at her in front of hundreds of witnesses. He had hated himself for years after that day. But this human had simply walked away. Did not know if that was strength or weakness, but he found himself curious about this Daniel Carter. On a station in the Outer Rim, a philosopher named read the reports with great interest. There were a species of thinkers and scholars. They did not fight wars. They studied the universe and tried to understand its patterns. Had written many papers about conflict and resolution. She had studied the method of negotiation and had always found it troubling. It seemed to her that breaking an opponent was not the same as solving a problem. You might win the battle, but you created an enemy who would wait for revenge. The human's response was something new. By refusing to engage, he had her victory. But by acknowledging the truth of her accusations, he had also her the satisfaction of proving him wrong. Began to write a new paper. She titled it simply, The Open Hand. Back on the station, finally left the negotiation chamber as the artificial lights dimmed to simulate night. She walked through the corridors to her quarters, a large suite decorated in the style. Everything was cold and precise. No soft fabrics, no warm colors, just clean lines and hard surfaces. She sat in a chair that faced a blank wall and did something she had not done in centuries. She thought about a single being for hours without finding a way to defeat them. Daniel Carter was not special. He was not particularly intelligent or strong or skilled. He was just a middle-aged human with gray in his hair and tired eyes. By every measure she knew, he should have been easy to break. But he had looked at her with those tired eyes and told her that he would not fight. He had acknowledged her power and then simply refused to be moved by it. And in doing so, he had taken away her greatest weapon. Had built her entire career on the certainty that all beings would react when pushed. Fear or anger, it did not matter. Both were weaknesses she could exploit. Both gave her power over her opponents. But what power did she have over someone who would not react at all? As the station's night cycle deepened, made a decision. She sent a message to the human ship. It was short and formal. It requested a private meeting. No advisors. No recording devices, just the two of them. She told herself that she was doing this to understand her opponent better. She told herself that knowledge was power, and that learning more about this human would help her defeat him eventually. But somewhere deep inside, in a place she rarely examined, she knew that was not entirely true. Something had happened in that chamber, something that had shaken her certainty for the first time in 800 years. She wanted to know what it was. Daniel received the message in the middle of his sleep cycle. The soft chime of his communication system pulled him from uneasy dreams. He read words twice before responding. He agreed to the meeting. Bate told him he was making another mistake. She said that private meetings with were dangerous. She said that might be planning something. Daniel said that she might be right. He said that he did not know what wanted, but he also said that he had to take the risk. If there was any chance of finding real understanding, he could not turn away from it. He dressed simply and left the ship alone. The corridors of the station were quiet during the night cycle. His footsteps echoed against the metal floors. He did not know what waited for him. He did not know if this was the beginning of something new or simply the next stage of his defeat. But he went anyway, because that was what it meant to keep your hand open. You could not protect yourself and reach out to others at the same time. You had to choose. And Daniel had made his choice. The observation deck was a small room tucked away in a forgotten corner of the station. It had no official purpose. No meetings were scheduled here. No important decisions were made within its walls. It was simply a place where beings could come to look at the stars and think. A massive window filled one entire wall. Beyond it, a nebula stretched across the darkness. Clouds of gas and dust painted in colors that had no names in any language. Purple and gold and deep red swirled together in patterns that had taken millions of years to form. Stood before that window with her back to the door when Daniel arrived. She did not turn to greet him. She did not speak. She simply stood there, her silver skin reflecting the nebula's light. Daniel walked into the room and stopped a few steps behind her. He waited. He had learned patience during his years as a diplomat. He had learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do was simply be present and let the other person find their own way to speak. Minutes passed. The nebula shifted slowly, its colors changing as new light reached them from distant stars. Finally spoke. Her voice was different than it had been in the negotiation chamber. The cold edge was still there, but underneath it, Daniel could hear something else. Something that sounded almost like confusion. She said that she had been a diplomat for 800 years. She said that she had faced beings from every corner of the galaxy. She said that she had learned to read emotions the way others read words, to see the weaknesses that all creatures carried inside them. She said that she could not read him. Daniel moved to stand beside her at the window. He looked out at the nebula and said nothing. Continued. She said that when she had attacked him in the chamber, she had expected him to react. She had expected anger or fear or desperate bargaining. She had prepared responses for all of those reactions. She had planned how she would turn each one against him. But he had done none of those things. He had accepted her words and walked away, and she did not understand why. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he asked her if she really wanted to know, or if she was simply looking for another weakness to exploit. Turned to look at him. Her crystal eyes caught the nebula's light and seemed to glow from within. She said that she did not know anymore. She said that for the first time in centuries, she was not certain of anything. Daniel nodded slowly. He said that he would tell her the truth, and she could do with it what she wanted. He told her about his grandmother. He told her about the old woman with white hair who had spent her life teaching children. He told her about the lesson she had taught him when he was young and angry at the world. He said that his grandmother believed that violence was easy. Any creature with hands could make a fist and strike out at what hurt them. That required no thought, no strength, no courage. It was just reaction, like pulling your hand away from fire. But keeping your hand open was hard. It meant accepting pain without causing more pain. It meant being vulnerable when every instinct screamed at you to protect yourself. It meant choosing to reach out even when you had every reason to pull away. Listened without interrupting. Her face showed nothing, but her eyes never left his. Daniel said that when she had spoken to him in the chamber, every word she said was true. Humanity had done terrible things. They had killed millions of their own kind. They had nearly destroyed their world. They had carried violence with them everywhere they went. He could not argue with any of that. He could not defend the indefensible. but he could choose what happened next. He could choose whether to continue the cycle of aggression and reaction, or whether to do something different. He said that walking away was not surrender. It was a refusal to participate in a system that only knew how to create enemies. By not fighting her, he had taken away her power to make him into the monster she expected. Was silent for a long time after he finished speaking. The nebula continued its slow dance beyond the window. New colors emerged as old ones faded. Finally, she said something that surprised him. She said that in 800 years, no one had ever spoken to her the way he had. No one had ever looked at her methods and simply refused to engage with them. She said that she had built her entire career on the assumption that all beings were predictable, that they would always react when pushed. She asked him if he was not afraid. She asked him if he did not worry about what would happen to his people if they decided to take the planet by force. Daniel said that of course he was afraid. He said that he worried about the colonists every moment. He said that he knew ships could destroy the human settlement in hours if they chose to. But he also said that fear could not be allowed to control decisions. If he had given in to fear and attacked her with words in that chamber, he would have lost even if he won. He would have proven that humans were exactly what everyone believed them to be. He said that sometimes the only way to win was to change the game entirely. Turned back to the window, she was quiet again for several minutes. Then she asked him a question that he did not expect. She asked him what he saw when he looked at her. Daniel thought carefully before answering. He said that he saw someone who had spent so long perfecting one way of dealing with the universe that she had forgotten there might be others. He said that he saw someone who was very good at finding weakness but had perhaps never learned to recognize strength. He said that real strength was not about breaking others. It was about building something that could not be broken. Made a sound that might have been a laugh. She said that he spoke like a philosopher, not a diplomat. Daniel smiled slightly. He said that his grandmother would have appreciated that comparison. The two of them stood at the window for a while longer. They did not speak. They simply watched the nebula and let the silence fill the space between them. Finally, said that she wanted to try the negotiations again. She said that she would not promise to give up her methods entirely. 800 years of habit could not be changed in a single night, but she said that she was willing to listen in a way she had not listened before. Daniel asked her why. Was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. She said that she had broken hundreds of beings over the centuries. She had won every negotiation she had ever participated in, but she had never once changed anyone's mind. She had never convinced anyone that she was right. She had simply forced them to accept defeat. She said that she was tired of winning battles and never winning trust. Daniel nodded. He said that he understood. He said that humanity had learned something similar through their long history of war. Victory without understanding was just another kind of failure. They agreed to meet again in 2 days. The official negotiations would resume, but something had changed. They both knew it, even if neither of them could put it into words. As Daniel walked back to his ship through the quiet corridors, he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. It was fragile and uncertain, like the first light of dawn before the sun rises, but it was there. His grandmother had told him that open hands could accomplish what fists never could. He had believed her, even when he could not prove it. Now, for the first time, he was beginning to see what she meant. The second round of negotiations began on a morning that looked like any other. The artificial lights of the meeting place brightened slowly, simulating a sunrise that no one on the station could actually see. Ships continued to arrive and depart. Beings from 100 worlds went about their business without knowing that something remarkable was about to happen. Daniel entered the negotiation chamber with Bate at his side. She was still worried. She had spent the past 2 days trying to prepare for every possible outcome, building arguments and counterarguments, gathering evidence and data. She did not know about the private meeting at the observation deck. Daniel had kept that to himself. Was already there when they arrived. Her advisors stood behind her as they had before, their faces showing the same cold neutrality. But herself looked different somehow. The ice in her eyes had not melted, but it seemed less sharp than before. She gestured for Daniel to sit. He did. And then something happened that made the advisors exchange uncertain glances. Asked Daniel a question, not an attack disguised as a question, not a trap designed to provoke, a simple, honest question. She asked him to tell her about the human colonists on 22B. She asked him what kind of people they were and why they had traveled so far from their home. Daniel spoke for nearly an hour. He told her about families who had wanted a fresh start. He told her about scientists who wanted to study a new world. He told her about children who had been born under an alien sun and had never seen Earth. He told her about the farms they had built and the schools they had opened and the small town that had grown up around the original landing site. He did not try to make them sound better than they were. He did not hide their flaws or pretend they were perfect. He simply told the truth about who they were and what they hoped to build. Listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke about the mining companies. She explained that the resources on 22B were valuable but not unique. The same minerals could be found on dozens of other worlds. The original claim had been made more out of habit than necessity, a reflexive marking of territory that they had done for. She said that perhaps the claim was not as important as she had first believed. The advisors shifted uncomfortably. This was not how negotiations were supposed to proceed. They were supposed to take, not give. They were supposed to dominate, not compromise. But continued. She said that she had thought about what Daniel had told her during their private meeting. She said that she had spent 800 years breaking others and calling it victory. She said that she had never stopped to ask if there was a better way. She proposed something that no one in the chamber expected. She suggested that the human colonists remain on 22B. She suggested that mining operations be established on the other side of the planet, far from the human settlements. She suggested that both species work together to manage the planet's resources, sharing knowledge and labor. Daniel sat very still. He had hoped for compromise, but he had not dared to hope for this. He said that he accepted the proposal. He said that he believed it could work if both sides approached it with good faith. The negotiations continued for another 12 hours. Details had to be worked out. Boundaries had to be defined. Rules had to be established for how humans would interact and cooperate. It was slow and sometimes frustrating, but it was different from before. Still spoke with precision and intelligence. She still challenged ideas that she found weak, but she did not attack. She did not try to provoke or manipulate. She engaged with Daniel as an equal, the way he had asked her to. When the agreement was finally complete, they signed it together before witnesses from a dozen species. The document bore both their names, a joint accomplishment rather than a victory for one side over the other. News of the agreement spread quickly across the galaxy, but the agreement itself was not what captured everyone's attention. What captured attention was what did next. She asked to make a public statement. Cameras were brought in. Representatives from news services across the Concord gathered to hear what the famous diplomat would say. Stood before them all and spoke clearly so that every word could be heard. She said that she had made a mistake. She said that she had come to these negotiations believing she knew what humans were. She said that she had expected to find a violent species ruled by emotion, quick to anger and easy to break. She said that she had been wrong. She said that Daniel Carter had shown her something she had forgotten in 800 years of diplomatic warfare. He had shown her that true strength was not about domination. It was about the courage to be vulnerable, the wisdom to admit fault, and the patience to seek understanding even when easier paths were available. She said that humanity had much to answer for in their history. Their past was stained with violence and suffering, but she said that their past did not determine their future. She said that she had seen evidence of something remarkable in this human, the ability to change, the willingness to be better. She ended her statement with words that would be quoted for generations. She said that she had spent her life breaking others and calling it victory. Today, she had learned that there was a greater victory available. The victory of building bridges instead of walls. The victory of finding allies instead of making enemies. She said that she had a human to thank for that lesson. The chamber was silent when she finished. Then slowly, beings began to speak to each other in hushed voices. What they had just witnessed was unprecedented. A admitting fault, a praising a human, a choosing connection over dominance. Daniel watched it all with quiet amazement. He had not expected this. He had hoped for a fair agreement and a peaceful resolution. He had not imagined that his actions would change anything beyond the immediate situation. But sometimes small choices have large consequences. Sometimes a single person standing firm in their values can shift the course of history. Years passed. Daniel continued his work as a diplomat, traveling from world to world, building relationships between humanity and other species. He never forgot the lessons of that negotiation. He never stopped keeping his hand open. 22B flourished. Human and communities learned to work together, then to trust each other, then to call each other neighbors and friends. Children from both species grew up knowing that cooperation was possible, that differences did not have to mean conflict. Changed, too. She did not abandon her methods entirely. 800 years of habit could not be erased in a single day, but she added something new to her approach. She began to seek understanding before seeking victory. She began to ask questions before making accusations. She and Daniel remained in contact over the years. They were not exactly friends, but they were something. Two beings from different worlds who had found a way to see each other clearly. When Daniel was old and near the end of his life, a young journalist came to interview him. She wanted to know about the famous negotiation. She wanted to understand what had happened in that chamber when a human diplomat walked away from the most feared negotiator in the galaxy. Daniel showed her the photograph of his grandmother. He told her the same story he had told all those years ago, about the old woman who believed that open hands accomplished what fists could not. The journalist asked him if he had been afraid when he walked away from. He smiled and said that of course he had been afraid. He said that fear was natural. What mattered was not whether you felt fear, but what you did with it. He said that anyone could throw a punch. That was the easy path. The hard path was to keep reaching out even when you had every reason to pull back. He said that humanity had traveled far from their home among the stars. They had met beings they never imagined. They had faced challenges that should have been impossible. And through it all, the lesson remained the same. The greatest strength was not in the power to destroy. It was in the courage to connect. The journalist thanked him and left. Daniel sat alone in his room, looking out at stars he had spent his life traveling between. He thought about his grandmother and the simple wisdom she had shared with a young boy who had not understood. He understood now. He had carried her lesson across the galaxy. He had proven that it was true. And somewhere out there, because of what he had done, humans and were building something together, something that would last long after he was gone. That was victory enough. That was more than enough.